The xenobiology classroom aboard the Galactic Accord learning station smelled of 16 different atmospheric preferences, a compromise that satisfied no one and offended everyone mildly. Professor Kithalan, a Theruvian with 6 sensory fronds and a reputation for theatrical pedagogy, dimmed the overhead lights with a flick of her secondary appendage. "Today," she announced, her translator implant smoothing her clicks into understandable syllables, "we discuss apex predators." 34 students shifted in their seats. Some tightened their carapaces. Others coiled their tails beneath their chairs. The lone Grellian in the back row secreted a small, involuntary cloud of anxiety pheromone. Only 2 students remained perfectly still. Darian, the human, leaned back in his chair with the loose, unconcerned posture of someone waiting for a shuttle that was already late. He had his arms crossed, a faint smile sitting on his face like it had been parked there and forgotten. Beside him, Vera, a Sorvathi, four-armed, silver-scaled, and intellectually ferocious, was already pulling up her data slate, her upper hands furiously annotating while her lower hands remained folded with practiced calm. Professor Kethalon connected the room's audio-haptic system to the primary display. "I will now play a series of recordings," she said. "These are real-time captures of apex predators in their natural environments. I want you to observe your own physiological responses. This is not weakness. This is biology." The room murmured with reluctant agreement. She pressed the first sound. It came from the speakers like a physical thing, a low, rumbling growl that started somewhere in the infrasonic range and climbed upward through the chest before it ever reached the ears. The bass frequency rattled the underdesk storage compartments. Several students made small, involuntary sounds of alarm. The Grellian's anxiety cloud doubled in density. "Panthera leo," Professor Kethalon said calmly. "Terran origin. An Earth lion. Mass approximately 190 kilograms. Territorial. Social hunter. The roar you heard can carry 8 kilometers across open terrain." Darian tilted his head slightly, the way one does when hearing an old song. "Next," said the professor. She played the second recording. This one was different. A series of deep, resonant booms, rhythmic and enormous, each one carrying a pressure that felt like a slow hand pressing against the sternum. The Thovrian twins near the window grabbed each other's forearms without looking away from the display. "Carcharodon carcharius," said Kethalon. "Contextual hydroacoustic signature of the great white shark. Earth's oceans, 6 meters in length. One of the most efficient biological hunting machines in known records." "Efficient," Vera murmured quietly, noting something on her slate. Then came the third sound. The classroom did not simply react to it. The classroom contracted. The recording was of a Siberian tiger at full vocalization in dense forest, and the sound was not merely loud. It was layered, built-in frequencies that touched ancient nerve clusters, that whispered to old parts of every brain in the room, the parts that still remembered what it meant to be prey. The Grellian knocked over its desk, trying to back away from the speakers. 2 Korvathi students, despite having no evolutionary connection to Earth whatsoever, stood up without meaning to. Professor Kethalon paused the recording. "Interesting response," she said, scanning the room with academic satisfaction. "Even species with no ancestral relationship to Terran ecosystems demonstrate a stress reaction to these sounds. This supports the cross-species predator recognition theory, that certain acoustic signatures trigger universal threat responses regardless of evolutionary origin." She looked to Darian. He had not moved. He was still leaning back in his chair. The faint smile was still there. And now, there was something else on his face, something thoughtful, almost nostalgic. "Human," said Professor Kethalon. "You did not react." "I noticed," Darian said. "Would you like to explain why?" Darian unfolded his arms, sat forward, and considered the question as though choosing which piece of a large and familiar story to begin with. "The lion," he said, "used to roar outside my uncle's cabin in Tanzania when I was 9. We'd hear it around 2 in the morning sometimes, deep in the hills. My uncle would just roll over and go back to sleep." He paused. "Eventually, so did I." A long silence settled over the room. "The ocean sounds," Darian continued, "remind me of night diving. You hear the pressure of big things moving in the dark below you. Sharks sometimes. You can't see them. You just know they're there." He paused again. "Once you accept that, The water is actually very peaceful. Vera looked at him sideways. She had known Darian for 2 academic cycles. She was still not entirely sure he was experiencing the same universe as everyone else. "And the tiger?" asked Kethulan. Darian's smile shifted into something deeper. "We have a forest near my mother's village in Siberia," he said. "The tigers come through sometimes in winter. You find the tracks in the morning. Big ones." He looked briefly at the speaker as though seeing through it. "When I was 12, I was walking back from the river alone and I heard that sound. That exact sound. Maybe 300 meters to my left in the trees." He was quiet for a moment. "I walked home. Not running. Just walking. Because running is the wrong choice." The Grelian, still standing beside its overturned desk, stared at Darian with all 4 of its secondary optical clusters fully dilated. "You were alone," it said. "A child? With a tiger in the trees? And you walked?" Darian looked at it with gentle sincerity. "Tigers mostly take things that run. So you don't run." He shrugged, as if this were a simple arithmetic problem. "You just keep walking and you don't look like prey." "How?" said Vera very carefully. "Does one practice not looking like prey?" "You practice it by living somewhere that teaches you," Darian said. "Most humans grow up around something that can kill them. You just get used to it. The sounds stop meaning danger and start meaning environment." He thought for a moment. "Home, I guess." Professor Kethulan had stopped taking pedagogical notes. She was simply watching him. "Every sound you played," Darian said, addressing the room now rather than just the professor. "Those are the sounds of ecosystems working. A lion roaring means the pride is establishing territory. A shark moving through water means the reef is healthy enough to support apex predators. A tiger in the forest means the forest is real, has depth, has something worth protecting." He settled back in his chair. "Those sounds made half this room stand up. They made me feel like opening a window." The silence that followed was a different quality from before. Vera set down her stylus. In 2 academic cycles, she had never once set down her stylus mid-lecture. "Darian," she said slowly, "are you telling me that the sounds of apex predators, beings that evolved specifically to kill and consume other creatures, make you feel comfortable?" He turned to look at her. "Yeah, because they remind you of home." "Yeah." Vera looked at her notes. Then she looked at the overturned desk. Then she looked at Darian. "I am," she said with the precise, measured tone of someone arriving at a conclusion they had not emotionally prepared for, "going to need a moment." Professor Kethulan turned back to the display and quietly pulled up the next scheduled topic, a comparative study of Terran versus Cathvilian predator biomechanics, then slowly closed it again. Instead, she looked at Darian with the expression of a scientist confronting a result that was technically within the expected parameters but felt completely unreasonable anyway. "Humans," she said quietly, not to the room, just to herself. "You evolved alongside the apex predators. We evolved among them," Darian said. "There's a difference. We weren't separate from the ecosystem looking in. We were inside it. At the bottom of the food chain once, actually, a long time ago. You were prey," said the Thovrian near the window, as though tasting an impossible sentence. "For a while," Darian agreed pleasantly. "We got over it." Vera picked up her stylus. She began writing very fast. "And now?" she asked without looking up. Darian considered the question with the same loose, easy calm he had held through the entire lecture. Through the lion's roar and the shark's pressure boom and the tiger's territorial fury, through the rattled desks and the toppled chairs, and the anxiety pheromone now hanging in the air like a visible fog. "Now," he said, "we build national parks to make sure they still have somewhere to live." Somewhere in the room, the Grelian quietly righted its desk. Professor Kethulan stared at the blank display for a long moment. Then she said, with genuine academic humility, "I am adding a new unit to this course." "What unit?" asked a Korvathi student. She turned back to face the room. "Humanity," she said. "An ongoing case study in not knowing when to be afraid." Darian smiled. Vera was already 5 paragraphs into her personal research notes. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their ancient indifference, utterly unaware that somewhere in a xenobiology classroom, 33 alien species had just learned something they would not forget for the rest of their considerably longer than human lives. The galaxy had no shortage of predators. It had only one species that heard them and called the sound home.